Yeah, we're just recording for, I guess, promotional or educational purposes. Great. Well, welcome everybody. I thought we could just start off with introductions. Everyone introduce themselves. I think everyone knows me, Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and the candidate for Congress. running as the empathy candidate, saying the world needs more empathy, and that's the core of the message. So really excited, to be here. So, Bill, do you want to introduce yourself? We'll just go around.
I've been at the University of New Mexico my whole career, and interested in studying human communications and empathy, and motivational interviewing is a method that I think approaches change with that mindset and heart set. So done lots and lots of clinical trials, and that's maybe I can help you not make some of the same mistakes.
Great. And I have all these books of authors that I've interviewed. All those are empathy books, like 3 shelves. And this is Bill's book, Listening Well. And of all the books, I really love this one, like as one of the top books.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it's just a real how to do empathic listening, kind of the core of the empathy circle and the work that we do. So I'm really glad that you're here to talk with us. Shannon, do you want to do it?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm at Antioch University as an assistant professor right now, and I teach developmental psych and intervention, but really interested in therapeutic empathy specifically, kind of focused on that for my dissertation and in certain projects following that and connected to that. So just really happy to be part of the group and kind of hearing about what can be done in terms of studying empathy with Edwin's Empathy Circle.
And we're also doing a project on defining empathy. So it's at definingempathy.com. There's a whole website devoted to that project. We've been meeting for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months or something like that. So it's an ongoing project. So Alison?
Yeah, I'm Alison Jane. I'm currently a postdoc at NIH, although I'm moving on to an assistant professor position in the summer, so winding down my time here. I'm an empathy scholar. I'm interested in on a more from a theoretical perspective than perhaps the other folks on the call, so I'm not practicing in any way. So I'm really interested in designing this study to collect some data from Edwin's empathy circles to try and understand how different types of listening impact empathy. So I'm really excited to meet you, Bill, and hear about sort of active versus passive listening and the, sort of your intuitions on how that might impact empathy.
Empathy scholar. I love the sound of that.
So Alison was going to just present. She's sort of the real lead on this study, sort of leading us to develop it. And so you could just share your, kind of your vision. We could open it up to discussion afterwards and get Bill's feedback. Does that work?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. Okay, so to sort of start at the beginning, let's give a brief overview. My work in listening and empathy beforehand has sort of suggested that essentially the amount that you're putting effort into trying to understand another person's perspective predicts improvements in that skill over time, sort of like a practicing kind of effect. And then when I took part in an empathy circle with Edwin, I found this really interesting contrast between what the passive listener is doing and what the active listener is doing. So I'm sort of coming at this from an idea of like effortful practice, improving empathy skills. And I'm sort of looking at the 2 roles of the passive listener and the active listener and thinking about which one of them is really, for want of a better term, exercising their empathy muscles and practicing that skill. And so we sort of talked a bit last meeting about how the active listener is often putting their effort into trying to accurately respond, and there's all the additional pressures of like the social pressure of I've got to respond correctly to this person. Whereas the passive listener can perhaps focus more effort on understanding the nuance of what that person is saying rather than trying to craft a response. So I'm sort of looking at this as sort of the power of listening versus maybe when you have to talk in a back and forth conversation might actually, I don't want to say detrimental because that makes it sound like talking to each other is bad, but that there might be actually some additional bonus to just listening without necessarily having the pressure of having to craft a response. So that's sort of where this has come from. So we sat down last meeting and sort of started thinking about how we could measure this in the empathy circle. And of course, the empathy circle has this back and forth nature where the role swaps between people as you go through it. And so we realized that to do this, we're going to have to sort of, unfortunately, artificially stop it after each sort of speaking round, ask some questions, and then go back into the speaking and listening for the next round. So what I did over the last week or so was crafted some questions that we would want to ask the speakers and the listeners after each round. So essentially the listeners are being asked questions that measure their cognitive and emotional empathy, and the speakers are being asked to sort of rate the listener as well. So hopefully we'll have a couple of DDs on the emotional and cognitive empathy of the listeners. And then essentially the analysis is going to sort of compare when people are active listening to when they're passively listening. That was the hope. Shannon also was talking about the importance of like over time. And so because empathy circles go often with the same group of people over time, we're also thinking about some more global pre and post-test measures to add in as well. As we're going to do this, we might as well sort of get the most out of it that we can. So at some point, once we've talked a little bit, I'm happy to share the sort of questions that I was thinking of and sort of the more detail and nitty gritty, but maybe we can just talk about the general idea first.
And Shannon, you have something to add here?
Yeah, so we were thinking about kind of selecting a number of self-report measures to administer both before maybe a roughly 10-week empathy circle kind of weekly program and afterwards to both get an idea about the types of qualities that people ranked as having the highest empathy by others in the group tend to have. Another thing that was of interest, especially I think to Edwin, was actually the impact that it has on the recipients of the empathy and kind of any skills or capacities that they find are strengthened by the practice. So I'm still in the process of kind of digging into what would make the most sense to add in terms of those measures, but those were our preliminary ideas so far. Yeah.
Edwin?
I'm not sure if we're talking about the empathy circle practice. I didn't sort of explain that. I did send a link, with the practice. I just wasn't sure how tuned in you were to the practice, which is pretty much ideally is for participants like we have here. We're doing the empathic listening, active listening, where there's a speaker, they select who they're wanting, who's going to be their listener. They reflect back until the speaker feels heard to their satisfaction. And then the listener becomes the speaker and they select, and we go around, in the process. So it's different from sort of a clinical, a client therapist, just the therapist doing the listening. And I do remember you had mentioned about when I did an interview with you about how it'd be good for like therapists to actually get more feedback about how they're doing. I remember something like that. I don't know if that kind of rings a bell. So it's sort of similar within an empathy circle. How are you doing as a listener? How do you kind of deepen your listening skills and so forth? So those are just some thoughts that come to mind. Just in general, I'm really excited about this because I'm really wanting to spread the empathy circle practice as a peer-to-peer process. And I think any kind of a study, about it could help, kind of legitimize it or kind of get the word out. So that's kind of where I'm coming from and wanting to support this in any way I can.
And where are you with approaching a definition of empathy? I mean, how are you going to measure this?
Yeah, that's, I can just say that there is the cognitive, effective cognitive model, which I don't like. I don't find that effective. I think it's, so yeah, that's the question we would need to get clarified between the three of us, like how are we defining empathy? So Alison has her PhD was kind of a sort of a defining of empathy, but in those affective cognitive framework, which she has a lot to say about that, I think, too. We had a big discussion. So that yeah.
Well, there's certainly an inner world aspect of empathy that, you know, your sense of connection with the person, even identification with the person. So I have experiences like this person's, you know, the sympathy, empathy kind of distinction. All of that is kind of the inner experience of the listener that doesn't really have much, at least direct effect on the other person, unless it's somehow expressed to the other person. In developmental psychology, empathy often is that kind of defined as that ability to step into someone else's perspective and see the world as it must look to them, you know, which not everybody can do, but most people can. So you're able to put yourself in the place of the other person as if you were that person and imagine what the world is like to them. So all of that's different from what I've meant by empathy myself, which is this particular skill. Originally described well by Carl Rogers and his students, which is reflective listening practice, or what they call accurate empathy, where you're trying to get closer and closer to what the person actually means. I often use a very simple model from Thomas Gordon that you may or may not know of, but it starts with what the speaker means or intends or is experiencing. That gets transferred into words, so it's kind of encoded as words. You have to hear the words accurately, which I find ever more challenging with my advancing age. And then you have to interpret what the words mean, so you kind of decode them. And I think most people, most of the time, respond as if that fourth box is the same as the first box. And they kind of assume that what they think the words they believe they heard means is what the person actually meant. Oh, you got it right there. Okay, very easy. Okay, that's Tom Gordon, exactly right. And reflection closes that circle to check. And you can do it by asking, but asking is kind of awkward. You know? Is this what you mean? Is this what you mean? Is this what you... It gets old pretty fast. And there's something more threatening about asking than simply stating your understanding. Now that's an odd experience for people as they're learning it. As if you have taught them that what they think it means isn't necessarily what it means, part of them just wants to ask, well, what do you mean? But it actually flows better. You learn more if you make them as statements. The essence of which is removing the question words at the beginning, do you or are you, or and then inflecting in English and many other languages, inflecting your voice down at the end. So you're someone that people can rely on. That's still a question. You're someone people can rely on. That's a reflection. So that's a particular skill, something that you do that has real therapeutic value. I mean, of all the things that an interviewer can do, this is the one that has the biggest impact on change, on benevolent outcome for the other person. And so when I'm talking about empathy, I'm really talking about that observable skill, a particular kind of behavior. Now, it's not detached from the internal experiences of understanding, identifying, feeling emotional connection with, benevolent intention toward. I mean, all of those are also things that are pieces of the experience of empathy. But in my career, I've particularly been studying this skill and how people learn it and its effect on outcomes. Yeah.
So Bill, I've got so many questions. So in your framework of this skill of being able to reflect back, I'm sort of thinking about the next consequence of that skill, and not from the recipient's point of view, but from the speaker's point of view.
Yes, so am I.
Listeners.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, okay, great.
It affects the speaker too.
Right. So one of the questions that I was sort of coming up with for this particular experiment would be having the speaker, after they've spoken, rate themselves on, I don't know, 10 emotions, like how sad, how scared, whatever you're feeling, and then have the listener do the same. Would you predict that active listeners would be better at that than the passive listeners?
And what is the scale?
So I'm just getting the speaker to rate how they're feeling on a variety of different emotions, and then getting the listeners to do the same and seeing how accurate their ratings are of the speaker in relation to the speaker's own ratings. Would you expect the active listeners to be better at that?
Not necessarily. I mean, when I'm doing this, I'm not attending a great deal to what I'm experiencing, but really trying to understand what the other person's experiencing. So
that's what I mean. Yeah. So getting the listener to rate what they think the speaker is feeling, and then seeing how accurate they are.
So would they say, this is what I think the person is meaning? And then
so I'm not focusing so much on meaning of like the words, but the feel, like making that cognitive emotional distinction here, like whether they're understanding how that person is feeling. So if they rate themselves as 50% happy, we would also expect the listener to rate them as 50% happy, and inaccurate would be to more happy or less happy.
I see. You're trying to match your perception of the other person's experience with their self-report of that experience.
Yes.
Yeah, that I would expect would get better over time as you're doing this in this particular two-person interaction.
Right. So I actually have the opposing hypothesis. So this might be really interesting. This is an empirical question. So my preliminary data suggests that it's the passive listeners that actually get that task right, more correct than the active listeners.
Now, I don't understand your concept of passive listening, which to me sounds like silence. And I think you mean something else.
So all I mean by that in this context is the role of the person in the empathy circle who is listening to the speaker but not saying anything.
Okay, you do mean silence. Okay, all right. So that you'll actually get a more accurate appraisal or sense of what the person means just by being quiet.
Yeah, so I'm bringing this stuff from preliminary data where I have people having a conversation. Actually, it's not an emotional laden conversation. It's just they're doing a collaborative task together. And then I pipe that audio through to another room where somebody else is listening. And I actually find that the people in the other room understand the emotional state of the people doing the task together more than the person doing the task with them, which was a big surprise to me, and sort of led to these questions about what sort of, and I'm thinking about it in a sense of like cognitive load. There's so many additional tasks that person in the room has to do all the time, whereas the person in the other room can like just focus on the task they've been given, which is to try and understand. So I'm sort of thinking about it like that.
And I get that. And so there's something that's interfering with the person's attention to and absorbing of what they're hearing. And what you mentioned is they're busy thinking about how am I doing? I'm supposed to do this skillful thing. And so they're really focusing on themselves and on performance, perhaps. And that can and does interfere with listening well. So it's getting to the place where this is second nature enough to you that you're no longer thinking about your own performance. You're no longer, if you're effortfully trying to think, now what's a reflection? How do I take the words off the front of it? I got to remember to turn my voice down at the end. When you're doing that, you're not listening to the other person. and your finding makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah, so at first, when you're practicing active listening, you're maybe going to actually have a poorer understanding than somebody who's not doing that effortful task. But as it becomes more automatized over time, you'll be better. Am I getting that?
Yeah, that's right. As it becomes comfortable or second nature or easier, you're not in your head rehearsing the mechanics of developing reflective listening statement. It's easy. So it's a practice kind of thing. And when you're a practiced listener like that, then you're not monitoring your own performance. I mean, it really is like beginner's mind or mindful meditation in a way, where your entire focus is on the other person and trying to understand who they are. And worrying about whether you're doing it right gets in the way of that. It does.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point, and I've neglected to consider its importance. I mean, we sort of talked about briefly, about people who would be better at this over time than others, but I think from what you're saying, that's going to really be the key predictor variable, is not only what role they're in, but also how practiced they are at that role as well.
Yeah, how self-conscious might be a way of saying, but how self-conscious are you about being a good listener? That goes away when you develop good listening skills over time, but it takes a while. Are you familiar with the deliberate practice literature? That's sort of related to what you're talking about too, of taking time to really get better at something intentionally. I mean, just practice it. And listening is a good example of where that makes a lot of difference. Something else is you are getting feedback constantly in the dyad. So as you offer a reflective listening statement, you're making a guess about what the person means, you get immediate feedback from the person about how close you are. Sometimes as simple as the word yes or no, but more often in more subtle ways. But at the extremes, or the person said, no, that's not what I mean. And at the other, the person kind of lights up and says, yes, no, you get me, you understand me. And that's done facially, it's done in the tone of voice, it's done in the content of the voice. And so more than, or at least in addition to having people fill out questionnaires about, what was it like, there's lots and lots of information immediately while the conversation is happening about how close the person is. And Roger's original measures of accurate empathy were looking at both the form of what the listener was saying and also how the person being listened to responded. And they give you clues about how close you are, which is how you get to a better understanding. Usually the first couple of reflections, you're not really that close to what the person meant, but every time you offer one, as long as the person says more than just yes or no, as long as they say more, you're getting closer and closer, and you have to stay on the horse, which is constantly moving. So every time the person responds to reflection, you know more, and you have more to reflect over time. So it's quite skillful. And in the beginning feels awkward, and you feel very self-conscious about it. And that gets in the way of listening, ironically.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, no, so I'm going to reconceptualize this as not just the active listeners are going to be more distracted by that sort of self-consciousness you're talking about, but that will hopefully reduce over time. And so,
yes.
Do you think when we're talking about that reducing over time, would the hour perhaps of an empathy circle be sufficient, do you think, to see a drop? Or is this something we're more talking about like over a 10-week session of practice? Like, what do you think the time frame would be?
Well, it varies widely. Some people take to this very naturally and easily, and they get it. Like, what is that about? I'm not entirely sure, but somehow it fits with their own experience and development easier. There are other people I've never been able to teach this skill to, no matter how hard I try. And that seems to be, this is more guess on my part, but it's as if they cannot appreciate that there are perspectives other than their own. And so they don't have the step of standing in someone else's space and understanding how the world looks from that space over there. And in between is most of us, with probably a normal curve kind of. So some people get it much more quickly and take to it. You see it, getting it, just having been given a kind of introduction to here's how you do it. There's some they say, oh, and they begin to try it out. They quickly get easier at it. And then others just struggle a lot more with it. And some, honestly, never get there.
So as I'm hearing you say this, I'm thinking about, for this experiment, the importance of us having naive participants over the 10-week course, and having them who never taken part in an empathy circle before, I think might be a critical need.
Because?
Because otherwise we're not going to be able to track that improvement, perhaps, because so some people come to the empathy circle so regularly, I'm worried that they'll have already sort of be pretty damn good and automatic at this, and we won't witness that kind of learning curve.
That's true. You'll wind up with less variability between individuals to begin with if they're all newcomers. Now, they're not newcomers to life, so they've had all sorts of other experience with listening or not, but newcomers to empathy circles at least. If you were interested, on the other hand, in the starting variability, the extent to which people differ in their skill to begin with, then you probably want to include some more experienced people.
Do you have any great measures of measuring that skill to begin with? Like if we wanted to get baseline measures?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's pretty much tracking reflections and the quality of those reflections. So in quality reflection, I'm talking about at one end, a simple reflection, which doesn't really make a guess at all. It even uses the same word. I'm feeling pretty depressed today. You're pretty depressed. I mean, that's about as simple as it gets. Or you're kind of down. Just a little bit of a synonym. It's not terribly risky, but it's where you start sometimes. To more complex reflections that are probably using more information, what you're seeing non-verbally and what's going on, to make a guess about what the person means by depressed. So I might be, if I'm looking at the person who's saying, I'm feeling kind of depressed, I might say, you're exhausted. Now, I have more than the person's words there that I'm attending to. I'm attending to how they're looking as well. But I'm making a guess that wasn't quite there in the beginning with just the word depressed. And I'll find out right away whether that's closer or, it's kind of warmer, colder, warmer, colder. You could even do that with the person who's being listened to. But that's the kind of cues I'm getting, that you're getting warmer. That's it. Well, not quite. Oh yeah, that's. And so to me, the feedback is happening in the interaction itself. And what a person says on a questionnaire will be some reflection of that, but not as good information to me as what's going on in the interaction itself.
Yeah, I'm feeling transcript coding coming up.
Well, that's how you do it. That is how you do it. And in fact, if you want nonverbals, then you need something other than the transcript, because the words themselves don't give you the music. And so much of empathic skill is the music as well.
Yeah, so we are planning on recording all of them, because they'll be done via Zoom. So we will have it available, although obviously limited to.
Sure, yeah. And audio recordings usually enough. I mean, you don't get the nonverbals, but you can kind of hear them often in the tone of voice and so on. But just the content, just the words that get written down in the transcript tell you some, But empathic skill is, a lot of it's about the music of the voice as well. What's happening with the timbre of the voice and so on. And then when you're physically present, with facial variability, the empathic person isn't sitting there blank-faced, not with no facial expression at all. The face is changing in response to what's being said, which is another way of saying, yeah, I get you. I'm trying here. If the person is describing sadness, you're not sitting there smiling.
That is an amazing thing that I've observed in the empathy circles, is the variability in the responses and how concrete some people are in repeating the exact words that they hear. And there's such a range, even with everyone starting out not knowing the empathy circle. Some come in repeating exactly what they hear, and some come in taking those risks naturally to kind of talk about the internal state of the other. So yeah, it's really fascinating.
Experience, yeah. And am I right, Edwin, you don't really do any coaching while this is happening?
Yeah, there's no coaching. Sort of everybody's learning. The silent listeners observe. They're seeing what's happening, and they have, like, at a time I see, they're how are they reflecting? And I say, wow, they did a really good job of reflecting. Or I think, wow, they kind of missed this piece. So as a silent listener, I'm sort of observing that. There's the aspect of the load. When people are first coming in, there is that anxiety. Am I doing this right? And that's why we like to be sure there's at least 3 rounds of the listening for each person, because the first 2 rounds, you're a little unsure. By the 3rd round, it's like you kind of move into this more of a ease, more of a, I'm not going to be attacked. This is safe. I'm going to be heard. And then there's something that happens where everybody starts feeling there's a nice feeling, a sense of connection that happens by the 3rd time. And then we have some that have gone for like 10 weeks. And then by the 10, it's like, it just gets easier and easier. Everyone's so familiar with it. You don't have that anxiety that happens at the beginning. I am curious, like, in terms of studying, where do you think are the areas for accurate empathy to be studied too? What is what's the horizon there that would be good to study, for the field? Because you've been examining this, for decades. Just so I'm wondering where you think,
matter, you mean?
Yeah, where's the research? I don't know, what could really be studied that you think would be really helpful? Just curious.
Well, I mean, one that's happening now is vaccine hesitancy. No, but there you're talking about the kind of the far frontiers when you're getting pretty skillful at this. What can happen in talking with people who are scared or hesitant about vaccine that might help them open up to doing that? Politics is the far frontier also. But that's super challenging stuff, because your own material can get in the way so easily. I often begin by having people talk about themselves, something what we call real play, not role play, something that's safe to talk to another person about, and yet there's a lot of depth there. With a good empathic listener, it's surprising how fast this goes and how quickly it gets intimate, which people can then, I'm not sure I want to talk this much about things. But that's easier. Talking about your own experiences is one of the easier things. I'm doing a 4-week class now with a congregation here. And last week we did the kind of talking about me, and I mean, not me personally, each person talking about themselves. And then the other person's using reflection to try to understand what they mean about that. And we use just a simple, give us an adjective that describes you. I'm someone who is winsome. I wonder what that means. So you begin to make reflective guesses about what that might mean. that's a good place to kind of shape up the skills. This week, we're doing statements of faith. And so what I have asked these people to do is, in preparation, what would you say are 5 central teachings in the work of Jesus? What are the things that Jesus really enjoins us to do? So now they're talking about something that's pretty meaningful to them. It's a congregation where people's views are reasonably similar, and so it's not as threatening as what I did last year, which is people from a very liberal congregation talking to people from politically very conservative congregation. That's tougher stuff, but it's safer. You don't have to defend your faith. All you have to do is describe it, and the other person's job is just to understand it. So, that's one. Values is where we're going next week, which is give people a values card sort to kind of figure out what are the most important guiding values in their life. And then they talk about that, and the other person's job is to interview them about that and understand what those values are, what they mean to them, how they got to be values for the person, how they're living them out in their life now. So that's pretty rich material. There's a lot of depth to it. Not too threatening, unless you're in this situation where it's set up for disagreement. And good place to develop those skills. And just from listening, if you listen to the interaction, you can count reflections, and at least simple versus complex. Did they stick with what the person said, or were they kind of moving it forward? One moving it forward skill that I teach is continuing the paragraph. So instead of saying what the person just said in one form or another, you say what might be the next sentence in the paragraph, given what you're hearing, seeing, knowing. You're making a guess about this might be the next thing the person says. You don't jump too far. A lot of skill involved in that. But when you do that, it just moves so much faster and deeper.
What we had, I think that had come up is what is the topic for the empathy circle? So it's going to set the context of it. And I think I'm hearing there, it's like, hey, you can have political, highly polarized people come together. It's going to be a very different study than just people, who are having sort of similar beliefs. And, if you bring Republicans and Democrats or even farther polarized people, it's going to have a different effect, certainly add more excitement, that's for sure.
Well, Braver Angels, who you probably know about, they do more what Alison's talking about is passive listening. So it's very structured. There's not crosstalk happening. The job is to listen to the person and understand. And then they allow posing of questions, but the question is posed to a moderator, not to the person who was speaking. And it goes through the moderator back to the person who was speaking. So there's a kind of filtering that can take the edge off of things that are coming in. So that's closer to what I think you mean by passive listening. There's no direct engagement between the two people. No direct responding.
Or I just may add, when it's actually the term we use is silent listener. So there's a speaker, a listener, and then the other two people are silent listeners. So I think that's what's being referred to. And I do want to just quickly say that in terms of Braver Angels, we've done empathy circle with some of the people here in the San Francisco Bay Area, Braver Angel groups. And I got a call from one of the leaders from the San Francisco Braver Angels. He's a Republican, and they had held a dialogue about vaccines. And they had like 1/3 of the people were Republican, the others 2/3 were Democrats. And he said, we were really worried about this, so we used the empathy circle practice. And it was so good. We couldn't have done it without it. He called me the first time, I didn't get the message. And he called a second time. He said, I just had to tell you this. It was like, he was just like, this was so good. We couldn't have done it without sort of this practice. And it is a different practice than posing a question, getting a comment, posing another question.
Right.
And those systems break down as soon as the
Yes.
as soon as the facilitator is gone, or the questions, you have more space to answer the questions. Those things kind of fall apart because there's no conflict mechanism, resolution mechanism, which the empathy circle slows things down and really has that the built-in resolution process. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Slowing
Alison,
it
I saw
down.
that. Yeah, I saw Alison. You were about to say something. I jumped in there.
No, it's all right. I actually think I forgot what I was going to say. I realize that we are quickly running through our time, though, so I'd love to sort of bring us back to some of the more nitty-gritty parts of what we were thinking of doing. So, okay, let me just share my. Oh, I can't share my screen. Whoever's in charge, could you allow me to share my screen?
That should be it.
Great. So I have here just a little document just to keep some notes together. So I've actually just been typing and updating these hypotheses as we talked, Bill, about now imagining an interaction between the roles and empathic skills, such that in early sessions, when people are not very well practiced at active listening, or the silent listeners may show better understanding, but after practice, we would expect that to flip. So I just have here some sort of bullet points about what we would want to measure at different times using the questionnaire. And I'm hearing all of the, we need to code the videos as well, which would be an additional step. But so before the empathy circles begin, obviously, we want to take some dispositional measures, exactly which ones I am not hugely married to. These are two I use regularly. If we could take a dispositional measure or a pre-test measure of ability of active listening or reflective listening, I think that would be really cool too. I don't know whether a simple one exists, but I think if it did, that would be something to add in. Then after each round, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, we've been doing that for decades. I mean, it's, you just pose a listening scenario to the person and say, show us your best listening. And then you look at what they do and count questions and reflections and affirmations and other stuff, agreeing, disagreeing, whatever else comes up.
Excellent. I will take a look at your stuff. That's fantastic. So then after each round of the empathy circle, both the speaker and the listeners, both silent and non-silent, would answer some questions. So the speaker is going to be rating their own feelings. So I'm doing this mainly on feelings and not content of what they said, because that could be so varied. And then the speaker's own perception of the listeners, how well they were understood. And I've sort of split that up into how well do you think they understood how you were feeling, and how well did they understand sort of the point that you were trying to convey, in case they're different. For listeners, they're going to hopefully rate the speaker's emotional state. And we talked about sort of mapping that onto the speaker's own rating as a kind of measure of accuracy here. Rating their own feelings. So this would be like Batson's adjectives of empathic adjectives, how sympathetic you're feeling, how compassionate you're feeling, et cetera, et cetera. The listeners to rate their own perceptions of their own accuracy. So how well they think they understood, I think would be key, especially if we compare then later to the coding of their reflections. And I wanted to kind of capture some level of effort, like how hard is this task, with the hope that we're going to capture that automaticity going down. It should get easier and easier, and hopefully ability will get better and better too.
That all makes sense to me.
Yeah. And then obviously at the end, we maybe also want to consider some pre-post-test measures, as Shannon was sort of talking about earlier. So if we wanted to, oh, sorry, did you have a point you want to go?
I was just going to say the measure that a measure we developed decades ago was called the Helpful Responses Questionnaire. And it poses little statements that someone might say to you. And then it's just, what would you say next? And you can code those next statements for what are they? giving advice, or are they agreeing and disagreeing, or is it some reflection? Is it asking a question? What is it? And it's a paper and pencil version that seems certainly not strongly related to what people actually do in conversation, but it's at least the ability to offer helpful listening responses. And we got changes in that questionnaire after training people in active listening.
Excellent. So you could envision that potentially being used as a sort of pre-post measure.
Yes,
Great.
we did that. We used it that way. And you can make up whatever content you want, so that you don't have to use the examples that we used of a neighbor says to you or a friend says to you. You can use whatever content you want. The key is the coding of the response, the next thing that the person says.
Thank you. Yes, I will definitely be looking that up. Shannon, sorry.
I can send it to you. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that sounds really great to use. Maybe it's the assumptions that I come into this type of thinking about empathy with, but and I think Edwin kind of might share some of this. I mean, I won't speak for Edwin, but a lot of times I'm looking at kind of what gets in the way of empathy, more so than even what empathy is, because it almost feels more natural to be connected and curious about other people. And so
Yeah.
I heard you mention self-consciousness, and I've been interested in shame proneness for that reason, that shame is defined as like actively turning away from the other, or the one emotion that like so effectively blocks us off from others. And I sense that maybe you had some ideas about that, and in service of like planning this pre-post measure that we're looking at, I wondered if you might kind of share some of your thoughts on that too. Alison and Edwin too, if you have them.
Well, there's content that triggers people, not necessarily in a traumatic stress way, but just to have an automatic response, or you raise the word vaccine, and you stop listening, the wall goes up. So that can get in the way too. That the content of what's being talked about is so personally loaded, or you identify with it so much that you just stop listening. I don't want to hear this. That's happening so much now, even to the extent of if you're a member of the other team, I don't talk to you. I don't listen to you. I've never seen it that bad before.
It makes asking a provocative question like that sound really interesting, especially in a time like now. My initial thoughts to that, but it looked like Alison, you were going to respond as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm just such a basic scientist in the sense that I'm thinking compounds. I think the topic of the empathy circles, especially if we've envisioned this as a 10-week sort of study over time, is going to be a really critical decision, and I'm not sure where to go with it yet. I just feel like it's going to be really important. I'm going to share in the chat the very first draft of a Qualtrics survey. Feel free to click into it. You'll notice that much information is missing, and feel free to just click straight past the IRI, which is the second question there. But you'll sort of see that this is sort of the interface I was expecting them to use. So they would be in a Zoom call just like we are and have the window open as well. One thing we'd have to make sure on a very practical basis is that between each round, they remember to come back into the Zoom, because if they can't see other people's faces, if they don't actually have the screen up, we're going to be missing, like if they try and leave this window open. I'm not entirely sure how we can check that they're doing it, but I guess lots of reminders. So my idea is that they'd be talking, they do the round of the empathy circle, then we'd have a moment where everybody would go into this survey. So if you've clicked through and you've got to the point that says like, please return to the empathy circle. You're then asked which role you had. We'll rename these, obviously, Edwin to silent listener and listener in accordance with the empathy system. And then depending on which role you select here, you get a different set of questions. And so I'm trying to keep it pretty short so that you can, it's not going to disrupt from the empathy circle process overall, hopefully too badly. My idea is it will take like less than a minute for each person to do. And then you just go around again and you select your role and you get the questions again. I guess the reason I wanted to show this was sort of on a very practical basis. Do we think this is going to interrupt the empathy circle too much, or do we think this might be an okay level of questioning?
You're asking Edwin that?
Oh, I'm glad to just test, just try it. It's, you never know until you just do it and try it and see what happens. And then if it needs modification, you just learn from experience. Is my approach.
The content of that could certainly affect the person's next responses. You're now in a self-consciousness sense, you're now thinking about the points that are raised in that questionnaire and saying, maybe I should be doing this. So it could change performance in a way. It's a dispositional questionnaire, right? Yeah.
So well, the first one is that's the IRI. We could not use that. So the other thing is, because we're hoping to have the same 10 people for 10 weeks, maybe we wouldn't have any sort of questionnaires before each empathy circle, but have them chunked actually previous. That's actually a really good suggestion. So
yeah,
let's
keep it out of the circle context and just get the information you want. And for dispositional things, that's fine.
Yeah. So then if you click past that, you'll get to sort of the questions that we'd want to sort of put in the circle context.
Well, I had clicked willing to participate, so I could get into the questionnaire and it wouldn't let me go past it without having answered. So.
Oh, it wouldn't? Oh, I thought I'd said it so that it could. I do apologize.
So I didn't see what followed the dispositional questionnaire.
Let me take it out and re-give it to you. All right, so I've taken it out. Hopefully this will work now.
Let me try again, see if I can do it. Okay, so now I see the daydream, those things. There is one unanswered question on this page. Would you like to continue? Okay. What's your role? Okay, I see that. Now return to the empathy circle. Okay, so all I saw was what was your role, speaker, listener, but I didn't see additional questions.
I'll try pick another role, see if it works. The programming may not be perfect.
I got through to rate your feelings, these emotions you were taking. So joy, angry, afraid, sad, disgusted, surprised.
Yeah, I just went with the accurates, for lack of a better idea. I think that we would need to change those emotions, maybe based on some pilot work, on what you think, Edwin, are sort of the most common emotions people report feeling, because these are pretty big ones that we probably not.
Anxiety would be good, but also like a field where you to add a feeling and then.
Oh yeah, we could do that.
Add exploratory, yeah.
Then depending on what role you've clicked, you'll have either how well do you think the listener understood you, or
how much effort did you put in to listening? Was that the other one?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It just goes round and round and round, and I was just doing this before meeting to give it sort of an idea. So the programming is not perfect. If you
sure, okay.
Yeah, I'm really curious what people would say about how well do you think the level, because we have this. You do run out of time, and then we say, well, yeah, I feel heard to my satisfaction. It means like I'm not 100% heard, but I'm heard enough. So it'd be really, I'm really curious what people would put in there.
Edwin, do you think that the distinction between like understanding what you said versus how you're feeling matters? I had an intuition it would matter, but I'd love to get it.
Yeah,
those sound like different dimensions to me.
Yeah.
Did the person understand the content of what I was saying? that they understand how I feel about it, how important it is to me.
Mm.
Yeah, I may have
when
to.
people tap into the felt experience, it just goes so much deeper. They feel there's such a deeper sense of satisfaction and connection when, yeah.
Mm.
There's certain kinds of reflection that do that, or can do that quickly, like metaphors can really make that connection. One I've used in a book or two is a symphonic musician that I was seeing in therapy who was pretty depressed and feeling very alone. And at one point I said, it's like the sound of a flute in an empty concert hall. And he wept. And then he said, yes, so in his image system, at least, that's what it's like. I know that sound, he knows that sound, and that connected in a way that was very quickly advanced the depth of what we were doing.
Excellent, cool. Well, it sounds like I'm not hearing any major issues with the idea of asking a few questions in between and maybe doing something like this, although obviously we're going to have to workshop the actual phrasing, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure, yeah.
Is it possible, I guess this question is to Alison mainly, like, is it possible I'm hearing like 3 potential questions we could ask? Is did the person understand what you were saying? Does the person understand your underlying emotion? And how satisfied are you with kind of, because satisfaction seems like it's a little bit different. Like you can feel understood, yet not appreciate or not even
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, so with the phrasing satisfaction, capture that, do you think? How
I
satisfied?
wonder, yeah, it seems, satisfaction. Yeah, that's a good question. How satisfied are you with that interaction? It would be interesting if someone were to rate the understanding low and still feel satisfied with an interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes empathy is about not understanding, which is weird. And I can't quite wrap my mind around that, but sometimes people don't want to be understood. And so actually not taking that risk to say something about their internal state might actually be an act of compassion, sticking with their words.
Yeah, no, we can definitely add in a question about satisfaction.
If it makes sense.
A mixed match between potentially being satisfied, but feeling understood and vice versa.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's how I frame the circle. I say, you'll be heard to your satisfaction.
Oh, perfect.
It's like, it's like, hey, I'm not totally heard 100%, but yeah, I'm satisfied. It works for me.
Good enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe the phrasing then could be, how satisfied are you that you were heard? Sort of flip it, and then you could make it a continuum measure rather than a yes/no measure.
Understood, I think, maybe. How satisfied are you that you were understood? So I need to get going, Alison. If you give me your email address, I'll send you that questionnaire.
Yes, absolutely. I can put it in the chat, or would you prefer that I just email you so you can email me back?
We were all three on the email list, so it's in the last the email.
Then it's already done. Okay, good.
I'm Alison Jane.Martingano@nih.gov.
Okie doke.
Thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate you meeting with us, and you've really helped us get this conceptualized.
Good.
Great to see you again. Just really appreciate all the work you do.
Great topic to be studying. Yeah.
Great to meet you. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, Bill.
Bye.
Thanks again.
All right. Well, I've changed my a lot of different thoughts around it from that meeting. So really great suggestion, Edwin. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for setting this up. It was really great to kind of hear more of your ideas, Alison, and to also hear from Bill. That was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm clicking the wrong buttons over here. I'm trying to unmute the wrong people. What do we want to do as next steps? From my perspective, paperwork is the next step. But are there anything else that we should be working on other than sort of study protocol and design?
Well, I personally would like to take a little time, both to kind of meet with the both of you, but also to research questions that remain unanswered about non-therapists and their empathy, and kind of what's been found out already in the research, and what are the gaps. I have an interest in certain variables, certainly, as I'm sure both of you do. But I think that's a little bit of a different question than, what are the gaps in the literature, and what could we, what would be most productive to look at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Shannon, that sounds like a great first step, bit of a literature survey in that area. Yeah. Would you be willing to take that on?
Yes, I'm happy to. Do you have the Qualtrics membership, or can I just like make one that we could test out? Is that a free service, or is that something that you pay for?
It's not, unfortunately, a free service.
Okay.
So
I can use SurveyMonkey or something. Yeah.
Yeah, the benefit of this is it allows this sort of looping for so you can go through it over and over again with different roles and stuff like that. But I can, I don't know whether you might get it through your university. Sometimes they have, I don't know who you'd have to contact, but they might.
Yeah, exactly. I'll find a platform. I don't think it's that big of a deal for the pre and post, because it doesn't have to be as fancy as what we're going to need to do during the circles themselves.
Yeah, I spent far too long this morning trying to figure out the programming behind get it to come back. It's just one of those tasks. It's like, this should not be taking me this long.
Well, it's great to see that. Yeah, I love that. Just I had been thinking about those kind of questions. So it was great to say, hey, there's magically they just appeared. So yeah.
Yeah, and of course, if you have any ideas about changing phrasing, so what I might do is sort of download the Qualtrics file, perhaps as like a Word document, send it to you guys, and maybe you could sort of comment and tweak phrasing here and there, like the satisfied question, for example. That would be great if you'd be willing to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy. And if you have variables you'd like me to look at for the pre and post measures, I'm happy to kind of research into those as well.
Yeah, so from what Bill was saying, some of the things that I had initially conceptualized is just before the empathy circle. I'm now thinking definitely want to be into some pretest of some kind, not connected with the day of.
Right.
And I think that was a really good point that I should have clicked with and I didn't. So if I could send you maybe the one or two things that I'd like to put in.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think I had been assuming that from the beginning. I didn't think we were going to do pre and post every day.
Yeah, I don't know where my head was at, because now he says it out loud. I'm like, yeah, obviously.
It does make sense. So yeah, that'll work. Yeah, I think that'll work. Hopefully we'll get.
You want to put another meeting on the calendar to sort of serve as a
sure. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have tons of conferences coming up, and so my schedule is getting a little bit tight. What days? It's a Tuesday today. Does that work generally?
Tuesdays are good, or usually good for me.
Yeah, Tuesdays are generally good for me too.
So I could do the 22nd. Actually, not at the same time. Now I'm looking at it. I could do early, like at 9, or late, like at 12.
9 your time, I think, would be 6 my time.
Oh, that's very
wait,
early.
is that true? No, I'm doing the calculation maybe for where Edwin is in California. So actually it's the same for me. So
right, no, sorry, but Edwin, 9 me would be too early for you.
Oh yeah, it's like 9 a.m. here, which is the earliest would be noon for.
So if we did noon here, would that work for you?
Yeah, that's a half an hour earlier than today, so that works.
That sounds great for me too.
Hang on, so noon Eastern. Am I right? Okay, noon Eastern. Yep, okay, great.
I used to live in California, so I'm like doing the calculations and I shouldn't be. I'm not there right now.
I struggle so much with it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Edwin, do you think you could send out a calendar invite?
Yeah, I don't really use the calendar invites, so would you mind doing it? Just I mean,
Yeah, sure.
I usually use
meant with the
Outlook
Zoom link.
here. I don't, I'm not really set up for, if you
I'm
mean
happy.
like on, I'm not even sure how you're doing those. You mean like,
I just meant for the Zoom meeting. I can send out a calendar invite. I just asked if we could use your Zoom, if that would be.
oh,
all right.
use my Zoom, sure. Uh-huh.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Yeah, because my
of course,
WebEx,
yeah.
as we found, was not the best.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's a
I'll
little
send out
bit-
an invite for 12 noon Eastern on the 22nd. And what I'll do is before then, hopefully at least 4 or 5 days before then, I'll send you guys a copy for some thoughts and feedback.
Cool.
Yeah,
I'll
also the
check-
context I thought was really interesting. What is the context of who? Do we want people who are just new to this, or and what's the topic? And the whole thing about people in conflict. I mean, that adds some real, get some Republicans, Democrats, and that's also, or any other kind of conflict that adds a real a whole nother dimension that might be, it's like, hey, we did this with people in conflict, or I mean, it could be multiple studies on different,
Yeah,
different-
I really like the idea of using essentially naive, new
Mhm.
empathy circle people, because we can then see that improvement over time. I don't know about topic, but I like the idea of doing something kind of controversial, but I'd be tempted to put it near the end of the 10
Mhm,
weeks.
sure.
So that we get them sort of some basic stuff in beforehand, but definitely something to talk about.
Maybe after the post measure too. For the final, but that's kind of almost cruel in a way, because if there's anything that's left unresolved, it's like sending them out then after the whole training with this maybe sour taste in their mouth type of thing.
Yeah, maybe we could find a happy medium where it's still like a politicized issue, but maybe not quite one of the really intense ones. Maybe find a happy middle ground.
Yeah, I'm open just for just anything, just to get the ball rolling is fine, whatever works. I was thinking, we take our empathy tent out to, public spaces, and we went to some rallies, was the political left and right. I just remember two women, one conservative and one liberal in Berkeley. They sat down, we did an empathy circle, and you can see that that aspect of something is said and you can see the tension come in the other person, right? And there's sort of that block, and you have to kind of like keep people in the empathic listening. So, okay, there's something coming up, just reflect back, and then you'll get to say. So anyway, that came up too. It's a little bit of a side, but just that tension that people have when something is said that they don't sort of agree with, and how they tense up and would naturally go into sort of a escalation there. So anyway, that's just something that came to
Yeah,
mind.
maybe we should have a question that tries to capture whether that happened in the last round. I can't think of one right off the top of my head, but I'm feeling like that's maybe something we should capture as well.
Yeah, it's like, did you feel, I don't know, what is it? Did you feel something that the word that in the therapy is triggered? I mean, but it's not everybody's going to know that word, but it's that thing that there's something that sets you off. And I don't know what a good common word is for that. It's not therapeutic.
Like, did your guard go up?
Yeah, that's it. Did your
That's
guard
right.
go up on? That's a perfect. Yeah.
I wonder if that's speaking everyone's language, but something like that, it sounds like, is what you're getting to.
Yeah. Did something stress you, or guard go up? Because that is what happens, is that you can feel that guard go up.
Yeah, maybe we should be, now I'm wondering, because we asked the speakers how they're feeling so that we can see how accurate the listeners are, but maybe we should be asking the listeners how they're feeling too. And capturing like stressed, and I'm also just wondering whether we should, did you agree or disagree with what they said? I mean, sometimes that won't be relevant at all, because it won't be a matter of agree or disagree. And then again, of course, I'm always worried we're going to have too many questions.
I'd imagine that what you just said does affect their listening, though, whether or not they agree or disagree, especially like as the topic becomes more controversial, probably affects their listening quite a bit, whether or not they agree or disagree.
Yeah, because the more they disagree, the more they're thinking, hey, I got to respond, and it's detaching them from their listening. We're doing a democracy circle on the book on tyranny, 20 lessons, for democracy or something like that by Timothy Snyder. And the vaccine has come up, and there's been a lot of sort of stress, come up, and because there's very anti-vaxxers and pro-vaxxers, and so that has come up. So that's a topic that would.
I wonder whether maybe, and this might be disappointing to both of you, is for our first 10 weeks, maybe we stay away from controversy, and then we can see whether we get the same, because we're hoping to find this sort of practice effect now, and like the difference between the roles and stuff. And then we could do it again and see whether it still holds true in a controversial context.
Yeah, it works for me. Yeah, baseline. Yeah.
Yeah. Rather than trying to do both questions at the same time. And then I feel like we might get real messy and we'll not know why we're not finding what we expect to find.
I agree with that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right. Well, great, guys. I will see you guys on the 22nd, and I'll send you a copy of the sort of questions so we can workshop the phrasing.
Great. And we're meeting tomorrow, Shannon, is that right?
I didn't have that down,
Okay.
but I'll follow up with an email because it'd be great to meet anyway,
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay.
And I'll try to email both of you with what we had discussed. So.
And we'll have the transcripts. I can send you we'll have transcripts of this too. So.
Great.
Alrighty.
Awesome. Bye. See you
Bye
soon.
all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.